you to Dodie Bellamy's reading in CalArts Visiting Artists Writing Program Visiting Artists series. I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement to the Fernandino Tejabio Band of Mission Indians. If you read the LA Times, you noticed last week that the city of LA has a lot of new initiatives to change city policies regarding land taken from the indigenous communities. And one of the things that really jumped out at me is that there's a little park in town called Father Sarah Park, Juniper Sarah, and they're going to rename it in consultation with the Tongva, Gabrielina Tongva Indians. And there was a meeting ceremony with the city, the Gabrielina Tongvas and the Fernandino Italian about this, and also they are planning to rename the Christopher Columbus Transcontinental Highway, which is the stretch of the 10 freeway in LA. So, you know, very, very little bits of decolonizing this world. It's really a pleasure to introduce Dodie Bellamy tonight. I've known Dodie for, I think, 25 years, a good 25 years. We are here to celebrate the publication of two books. One is Bee Reaved, which is a new book of essays, and the other is The Letters of Mina Harker, which is a reprint, a reissue of Dodie's seminal novel of the 1990s. And The Letters of Mina Harker has had a life in the sort of literary community as I know it, kind of legendary life, because it's been very hard to get. It's been hard to access as a book. It has a fraught publication history, and it would be sort of like if you had Dubliners and Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man, but you couldn't get a hold of Ulysses. And I do think it's kind of like, Dodie hasn't written her Finnegan's Wake yet, but I kind of think it's her Ulysses. So The Letters of Mina Harker is, it's a, I think now you would call it fan fiction, but we called it Writing Through in the 90s, and it's a book written by Mina Harker, who's the wife of Jonathan Harker, the vampire hunter in the book and movie Dracula, and Mina comes and takes possession of Dodie. But Dodie also takes possession of Mina, and a lot of the book is a wrestling back and forth between these two people, these two characters, these two entities, these two voices. And it has a mix, it's an iconic piece of what we call new narrative writing. It mixes high theory and low pop culture, and sex and death, and you know, it's also a love letter. It's a set of letters, but it's also, the whole thing is a love letter to Gillian, Dodie's husband of 33 years, who died 2 years ago. Bee Reaved is a book of essays that was underway when Kevin died and is divided into two halves, here and there, which are, sort of mark his presence and his absence. And it is an interesting, these two books together form kind of bookends, right? The beginning of a remarkable love relationship, but especially remarkable literary relationship. And the Bee Reaved, I wouldn't say it closes it, but it marks a point of, a new point of departure with it, and a new reckoning with it. So it's my great pleasure to welcome Dodie. Please give her a big hand. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. I know that they did all this careful mic thing, and I just moved it. And thank you, CalArts, for hosting me. And so Matthias requested that I read one piece that's about Los Angeles. So, and that was a piece that I wrote for the Art Forum blog, and I used to write for it regularly, so they would really let me write anything I wanted. So I would just talk about Kevin's illness and my mourning and just post it on the blog. So since I'm doing that, which is a little short, I thought I'd do another one that was from the blog, and it's about photography. And I am working on a project where I'll be writing about a series of photos. This is just personal stuff I hope to make a book out of. So I've been thinking about photography a lot and reading a hell of a lot of it. So, photo op. I flashed my SF MoMA lifetime artist membership card, and the woman at the counter asked me, "What do you have in the collection?" Her question gets me tense. A few months after the museum sent me the card in the mail, a total surprise, some brainiac in acquisitions questioned my eligibility, and they threatened to revoke my membership. See me on the phone shouting at a museum bureaucrat, "You've got to be kidding me, this is beyond tacky." So this cheerful woman at the counter, I do not know if she's just being chatty or if this is a test. I say my husband has a piece in the Kiki Box. She looks confused and asks, "What's that?" I answered, "There was a gallery here in the 90s and they made a box with stuff in it." I grab my ticket and scurry over to the stairs that leads to the show, Snap and Share, transmitting photographs from mail art to social networks. Kiki was a seminal gallery that exhibited in San Francisco's Mission District from 1993 to 95. After 15 months, it closed due to the failing health of curator Rick Jacobson, who died of AIDS in February 1997. The Kiki Box, produced in 1994, was a collection of unique items by artists involved with the gallery. My husband, Kevin Killian, wrote out by hand 3 on a Match, a poet's theater production he put on at Kiki. 1 page included in each Kiki Box. Kiki was so small there was no room for the actors when they weren't performing. So they had to stand outside on the street with their ears to the door. And when it was time for them to enter, they would open the front door and walk on stage, then go back outside when they finished their lines. I'm not in the Kiki Box, but I did write a piece for the chapbook Rick made in conjunction with his Yoko Oko tribute show. Yoko heard about the show, and she left one of her signature screens on the gallery's message machine. Snap and Share, organized by Clint Chereau, the museum's senior photography curators, centers, like the Kiki Box, on the distribution of the ephemeral. Postcards, snapshots, pinhole cameras that capture their journey as they move through the mail, and the deluge of digital images uploaded to the beyond of social media. Included are pieces by established artists such as Moira Davey, Lynn Hirschman Leeson, Ray Johnson, but many of the works are by amateurs. The rationale for being displayed in an art museum is shaky as my being granted a lifetime artist membership. While much has been written accusing the internet of destroying photography as an art form, Snap and Share celebrates recent paradigm shifts. The show's core premise is that no longer is the dissemination of a photograph subordinate to its production, but a defining element in the photographic process. Furthermore, photography has transcended mere image making to become a language in itself. To illustrate this point, in his introduction to the show's catalog, Chereau quotes Evan Spiegel, the founder of Snapchat. "People wonder why my daughter is taking 10,000 photos a day. What they don't realize is that she isn't preserving images, she's talking. A pouting selfie is worth 1,000 words." The following night, I find myself sleeping in a hospital room in an armchair that folds out into a cot in front of a window. The condition of the patient I'm visiting is serious. This is Kevin. Terrifying, actually. I'm determined not to take any photos, to not be so tasteless. The memories that are being created here, I want to erase, not freeze. We'll ultimately spend 11 nights in the hospital, long enough that the experience becomes normalized. Medical types wake up the patients at all hours, poking and performing procedures. Nurses bring us endless pitchers of ice water, and if we ask nicely, little cardboard cups of ice cream. Chocolate for the patient, vanilla for me. Curator Liz Thomas visits, and on the flat screen hanging from the wall, the three of us watch Melissa McCarthy in Life of a Party, which I've already seen on a plane. Liz and I covertly sip from cans of hard cider, not sure if we are doing something forbidden. After the movie, Liz notices the swirly, highly photoshopped abstract flower image hanging on the wall behind the patient. What's the point of that, Liz muses. The patient can't see it, so why is it there other than to serve as a background for photos? Subsequently, as I walk through hospital corridors, I notice similar flower patterns crowning the headboard of every bed, with more elaborate arrangements swishing vividly across the translucent screens on each floor that separate the bank of elevators from the visitors' lounge. The designs are seductive, beseeching me to throw myself or someone else in front of them and snap away. But I resist. Then one night at 2:30 in the morning, I get up to pee, and when I return to my cot, I notice on the roof of the empty parking garage across the street, a guy working on a bicycle that has been turned upside down. In the stark lighting, suspended above near featureless concrete, the bike's spokey wheels turn carnivalesque. Hunched over in his black hoodie, the guy looks like a troll who has stepped out of another dimension. Above the bike's red seat, a red light flashes incessantly. Hanging over the back of my fold-out chair bed, pushing my iPhone 6S's camera to the limit, low light, zooming on an object in the distance, I snap 18 photos, hoping one will turn out right. The photo bug has infected me, and after that, I cannot stop. I turn around and capture the privacy curtain, which in the darkened room glows with light that seeps in from the hallway. The next day, when the patient leaves for an MRI, I photograph his floral headboard decor, then the bouquet that sits on a ledge as Wendy Williams emotes on the flat screen. I do not photograph the patient. It is safe to document the staging, but not the play. Later, when curator Anthony Huberman brings his lunch, I position him in front of the privacy screen and say, "This is a perfect backdrop, Anthony." Anthony flashes a smile as if he were posing for a scene in her diary, our hospital room, a glamorous hotspot. If photography has become a language, what are my photos saying? I'm not totally sure. For in all communication, there is surplus beyond one's intent. Perhaps the images assert that even in the midst of institutionalized crisis, there is pleasure and connection, and times when space crystallizes in such a manner that you stop everything, you cannot help yourself, and you stare and snap. So, and then this one is about Los Angeles. I just thought I'd skim to it rather than look it up, but maybe that was a mistake. Okay. Okay, so this one's called Anniversary. Monday, June 15th is the anniversary of the death of writer Kevin Killian, who was my husband for 33 years. The thought of spending it alone during this shelter in place is both terrifying and numbing. I have discovered an enormous capacity for numbness, which continues to surprise me. Before Kevin's death, I couldn't bear to think about the horrors of widowhood. Joan Didion's Year of Magical Thinking seemed like the most dangerous book in the world. I wouldn't touch it. After he died, I read it compulsively. For all other anniversaries this past year, I went to Los Angeles. The first trip was the weekend of July 3rd, our wedding anniversary. I stayed with Matthias Wegener. His partner was out of town, so he gave me their king-size bed. I hadn't had a full night's sleep since the beginning of June, but that giant bed swallowed me. I spent most of the weekend at it, gloriously unconscious. Here, let me do this for the Bee Reaved, Matthias said as he fixed me a snack. I love saying that word, the bereaved. Most people acted like they were afraid of me, but Matthias calling me the bereaved over and over again in an exaggerated, goofy manner, and I found myself laughing. Just a moment. I'll take the lid off and it's easier to sip, right? My memory of those early days is spastic, but if I squint and strain my mind, I see a group of us at Tax, an old school French restaurant in Silver Lake. I know this anniversary happened, and I'm pretty sure this dinner happened, and I'm pretty sure it was for our anniversary. Who was there? Hetty Alcolti, my editor at Semiotext, Hetty's partner, Colin Toyden, writer and editor Andrew Durbin, who was living in New York at the time. Matthias must have been there. I think I ordered risotto. Andrew and Colin talked passionately about James Baldwin, and afterwards I ordered a collection of Baldwin's essays. We were supposed to raise a glass of wine for Kevin, but I don't know if we did. Kevin's birthday was Christmas Eve, so I again stayed with Matthias. I went to 2 holiday potlucks and 1 sit-down dinner. On the 4th night there, I went to a Thai restaurant with Bradford Nordine. Now it's coming back to me. On that first trip on the 4th of July, Bradford took me to Echo Park, where we looked at ducks and lily pads. And afterwards, I posted pictures with happy captions on Facebook. Yes, things are great here in Los Angeles 2 weeks after the death of my husband. Why wouldn't they be? Even though Joe Didion taught me that doing well should not be the goal of my widowhood, I was embarrassed by my incompetence at keeping it all together. I still am. Another memory, after Echo Park, Kashila Brooke had a tiny barbecue for me. Don't expect me to perform mourning for you, I said when she greeted me, and she smiled. Flash of a picnic bench in Kashila's backyard. Sherry Rose is sitting across from me, reminiscing about the death of Bob Flanagan. Kashila's big, floppy, long-haired dog seems to be everywhere at once. For my birthday, February 14th, I spent the first 2 nights at Hetty's and the second 2 at Matthias's. Having both been born on holidays, Kevin and I understood that sense of feeling special, but also of feeling eclipsed on our day. When Kevin, who would get over 500 birthday wishes each year on Facebook, died, I again felt eclipsed by the outpouring of social media mourning. For me, his death was intensely private, yet it dominated the poetry, indie publishing, art Facebook, and Twitter feeds for a week. His death was bigger than David Bowie's. There were tributes published by those who loved Kevin and whom he loved dearly, by those he politely suffered, and by assholes who don't have a right to speak his name, but who speak anyway. This piece is not a tribute, it is about loss, his terrible loss. Little of Kevin is here. Widowhood is an anti-space. There is the world, there is you. The connections are erratic and confusing. Hetty's former partner, who died of cancer, was a politician, so he understood that feeling of having the privacy of his mourning violated by all these others who claimed a piece of Bill. On my birthday weekend, we sat at Hetty's kitchen table until 3 a.m, drinking wine and talking about our beloved's deaths. I'm surprised how similar Bill and Kevin were. No one ever reminds me of Kevin. Kevin is lauded for being this easygoing guy, always there to support and entertain. Someone who brush off the pettiness and drama that the rest of us in writing and art scenes suffer under. In truth, Kevin was an extremely sensitive person who couldn't deal with conflict. He would do anything to erase conflict. For instance, his role as a biographer and editor of poet Jack Spicer led to an occasional vicious attack in print due to some perceived error in Kevin's scholarship or interpretation. Things so minor that in the real world they'd be laughable. The way Kevin would handle this is to befriend his attacker through flattery and kindness, whatever it took. He could convert sworn enemies into allies. Kevin loved musicals. His core sense of sanity was so fragile, he needed to believe the world was beautiful and glorious as a musical. When we were getting involved back in the early 1980s, one of the first things we did together was watch his video cassette of West Side Story. Tributes to Kevin go on and on about his kindness. In the Laurel Canyon documentary, which I watched last weekend online, fame is portrayed as this force that doesn't so much corrupt as it destroys. But Kevin reveled in his big fish in a small pond type thing. I am Kevin Killian, he would proudly say, as if the world should sit up and take notice. And he'd flash a big smile as if it were a blessing. His kindness was authentic. He was truly a good person, but his kindness was also a shield. He needed to be loved, not just by me, but by everybody. And if somebody didn't love him, the musical couldn't play, and he was devastated. I couldn't protect him when he was alive, and the longer he's dead, the less I try. One thing I learned from Matthias, who is Kathy Acker's executor, is that all attention is good attention. Like Kevin, I need to say yes to everybody. Okay, so I'll... Okay. Okay, so I'm going to read a bit from Mina, and since I read from the very beginning in Matthias's class, I'll just go a little bit further in the very beginning. So, spring's poking my butt, his arms and legs jutting in all directions. KK and I sit on the velvet sofa in front of a 12-inch black and white TV, eating our first wedded meal, champagne and Kentucky Fried. He goes, "Don't you just love Hill Street Blues?" I look deep into his eyes. Whatever. I'm happy as a hen, reminiscing. 11 o'clock last Thursday night, frantic meows at the foot of my bed were driving me crazy. Kevin appeared on the landing with 2 cans of cat food. I was wrapped in chenille from neck to ankles, and a regular V of flesh splaying from cleavage to throat. I opened the door. Reaching for the can opener, my gaze skimmed the bulge in his tight white pants. Kidney and gravy is nice, but how do you feel about bits of beef or kitty stew? The chenille was so hot, so heavy. One tug at the tie and I became a shattering of V's, a Duchamp nude. I reached for an extra crispy drumstick, my wedding band gleaming, white gold for the moon. When he slipped it on my finger, he whispered, "I'll follow you anywhere, like death follows life." You get it? Okay. I wiped my greasy mouth, wondering, now that we're in the happily ever after. Later that evening, there's a power outage, carpe diem. On the dresser burn 3 brown candles, 2 in monolithic stands cut from red brick, the other borne on the arched back of a wrought iron beast with a bird's head. Overdetermined archetypal, but I'm not immune. The spaghetti straps of my leopard skin chemise slide off my shoulders. KK still in street clothes. He rubs the burnished silk across my hip bone, lowers his lashes. Ooh. I gobble the perfect air that touches his face. The shadow of a jade plant looms across the drapes and onto the ceiling, a tropical phantasm from the 40s. He says, I've come to meet you in the jungle, jungle girl. I rub his ass. The tarnished cotton glides easily over the firm muscle. I wedge my fingers beneath the waistband, tender ridge across his lower back. Candlelight beats wearily, as though nervous, along his thighs. I crack them apart and rub my nose against his soft, hard cock, nostrils itching with fabric softener and urine. Less than a year ago, I stood in his hallway and wailed, I love you, sob, sob, I love you, please let me spend the night. He said no, a mind like a ring sliding shut on some quick thing. But now I have him. Today is my wedding. Clotheslines bind her arms and feet. Gaffers tape her mouth. Carpet burns sting her elbows. An hour ago, she gave up struggling. Lies on the living room floor, still as a doorstep. Intermittent rush of breath, heart, brain. She watches her captor, a knife-happy ex-con slouch over the sofa, waiting. And I can't remember what this movie is. The phone rings. Okay, boss. He wraps an arm around her waist, lifts her to the sofa, and wrestles a pillowcase over her head. She twists and grunts as he grabs tighter, locking her ankles around her slim calves, pressing his jaw against her Muslim cheek. He put a bag over her head. The pillowcase sucks against her nostrils and her bodies heave with the isolated gyrations of her fear. Nipples erect. The man is a serpent. He plunges his switchblade in her side. With each plunge, she is more whole, more woman. Outside the bag is God in cold steel. Inside, visions lunge forward in jerks and stops. But reader, where are you? Inside the future, outside the past? This letter is addressed to you, but who, what are you? Some kind of William Gibson plug-in to my virtuality? An audience distant and nameless as the billions of herbaceous plants in the Amazon, unimaginably strange, potent. I never know which nut or berry will wind up on my kitchen table in San Francisco, tiny chunk in my rainforest crunch. Inside the bag, the woman recites the rosary of privations. Privation of light, terror of darkness. Privation of others, terror of solitude. Privation of language, terror of silence. Privation of objects, terror of emptiness. Privation of face, terror of reader. Privation of life, death. My friend Sam D'Alessandro said it's all about putting yourself on the line, engagement. And Dr. Van Helsing agreed, but I countered with, repression's more interesting. KK's tongue is an oil rig drilling into my soul. Bad metaphors are the only way we can approach the really important things. Don't you agree? This book is the bag, so is my cunt.
Questions, thoughts, opinions, bad metaphors. Come on, dear readers.
Any interest in reading the Scanners passage for Mina?
The scanners in Mina?
Yeah.
Well, somebody knew what page it was on, maybe, but
Go, King, go.
scanners, but yeah, Cronenberg was really, I was obsessed with Cronenberg back then.
The book is filled with
30 what?
33. The book is filled with readings or glosses on horror films of all kinds. which were different than they are now. They were scary, but not as scary as they are now. Maybe I'm just.
Yeah, I haven't seen that.
I have the.
Oh, I'm gonna get it.
Yeah.
That's a collector's item.
What's the date of it? No, that's the University of Wisconsin, isn't it? I don't want to touch this book, no. Where is it?
33.
Okay. Okay. Oh yeah, I remember this, okay. A doctor's waiting room in Scanners. A pregnant woman sits across from me in a smock with a Peter Pan collar. A field of wildflowers shows across the yoke and billows about her global belly. Nature is a curtain that can be yanked back at any moment. She holds the bulbous mass, her left hand stretching the length of Canada, her right palm cupping Europe. The water cooler gurgles suddenly. Cut to Mina, doubled over. My cranium tightens, psychic fingers squeeze my spongy brain. I clench my abdomen, squeeze, squeeze. Salty red trickles from my nostril and drips onto my lower lip. The woman's fetus is scanning my brain. Reason, judgment, consciousness, memory, feeling, imagination flood the charged air, then whoosh into that ravenous unborn cerebrum. Paragraphs quake, themes jumble, candid autobiographical vignettes tumble in the blood jet and crack, macaroni in a vat of alphabet soup. You warned me about this in your letter. Do you know what can of worms you're opening? You think you're just going to make literature with impunity? Think again, sweetheart. You were my professor, the ne plus ultra of abjection. You wouldn't go see Godzilla in 1985, but you read me Baudelaire instead in French with perfectly intonated R's, translating line by line. I recognized a few things: le ciel, jusque, autrefois, la douleur. Cronenberg's evil doctors are injecting pregnant women with a serum to create a race of extrasensory monsters that will rule the world. Dr. Van Helsing, I finally get what you've been hinting at. Thoughts can kill. Is that it?
Thank you so much.
Does it go on? Okay, so your payment for that is to say why you wanted me to read it.
I mean, Scanners is a little bit bigger than we did, but also that piece about suffering for literature. Right? You think you can just write literature and without impunity? Like, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I was kind of hung out with a bunch of writers that, trying to like kind of get to the core of your vulnerability, and then the larger cultural vulnerability was very highly valued, like I can say, So, yeah.
I'm just wondering a little bit about like the function of naming people in your work. I often do that, and I don't change people's names, and I've often had people be upset with me about that, and I'm wondering like why. Yeah.
Well, for Bina, there's for Mina, everybody in there was writing about each other, so that was like a badge of honor. So that was easy. Now I think I have lots about people in Bee Reaved, but it's never anything really all that intimate or anything critiquey. But I just wrote this piece about going to see the Judy Chicago smoke sculpture with my chiropractor Karen. And so I sent her the piece before I sent it to Art Forum so that she could approve of it. So So I cleared it with her, because especially since she's not in the like kind of this world. So I just started, yeah. And then there's, when this issue comes up, I remember Eileen Miles saying this is when you learn how to write fiction. You know, like if you know that you just can't write about somebody, then you can just invent and kind of get the essence of what you wanted to write about so that nobody gets hurt or sues you.
I guess also just like, you also just use names a lot, and I'm wondering like what other, if there's any other impetus for that besides for just reference.
That's an really interesting question. I think it's just about an intimacy and well, this is all like kind of autobiographical type writing, so the people are there, but maybe on some psychological level, it's just not to feel alone in the writing. I don't know, but yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for asking.
It's also dialogic, right? So much like the letters are letters to people and they're responding to other letters.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no. But let me just finish first.
Sure. No, just they're dialogic. The letters are written to specific people, sometimes with their real name, sometimes with their pseudonym, right? A figure from Dracula. So to erase the names would fail, right? Like they have to be names, and there kind of has to be a surplus of names, right?
Yeah, and I have that part. This part in Bee Reaved, in Bee Reaved, the people that were like the most supportive of me, their names come up, And my friend Donna is in Bee Reaved several times, and then I had this dream, and it said to rename her Peculiar, like 2 words, and I bought her a bracelet on Etsy that says Peculiar. So she really loved that set. But I don't know, you know what I mean? So why I dreamt that, and it just seemed perfect if Bee Reaved was going to have a best girlfriend, it was going to be Peculiar, right? So,
Yeah, I'm wondering if you could say more about fiction, like aside from the strategy of not making individual people mad. And really, TV Sutras is a really important book for me. As
thank you.
How I love it.
No, I think more people should read it. I really I really like it, but it's not, what I mean. But anyway.
So that's the text I'm thinking of when I'm feeling this inquiry of like, are there moments you're choosing fiction? Is it kind of something that happens? Like,
Well, I think that's a really good question for that book in particular. So I'll just describe it. So there was some website that was doing this project where you were supposed to write some poetry based on divination or something like this. And so I did this project where I would do yoga and meditate to a DVD. And then I turn it off and then I turn on whatever was on the TV, and the first line I heard would be the sutra of the day. Mm-hmm. And then like high from meditating and yoga, I would write. I had been so involved in the New Age, I could just shit it out, right? So I would write kind of a sincere interpretation of the sutra. And the sutras would be from movies, tampon commercials, you name it, so that's what they were from. And so I did like 72 sutras. And then I wanted to contextualize it. And I had the question is like, how valid are my sutras like compared to like the Bible, say, for instance, something that's been like, I read a lot about received writing. So my goal was to I was in a cult for 10 years, so I did have a lot of experience thinking about this. So I was going to write like this sort of straightforward autobiographical essay about it, and also kind of think about like how valid are these, I actually used to send, I had like a following of like 2 people, so I would send them a sutra a day, and people have people have found them useful. It's as you find anything useful, right? And so anyway, the intent was to write this very straightforward autobiographical piece, kind of thinking about this issue, and it did start out that way, and then I got to the point where I couldn't do it. I kept thinking about, what does it feel like to be in a cult? And straight autobiography is never going to give anybody a sense of what it's like to be in a cult. So I started creating characters, and I ended up with this kind of mythic poet, you know, and this girl that's like kind of abused by this cult leader, and then I got this idea that what I wanted to do was have this individualized I, that's Dodie, and somehow shift to a universal I, so you don't know who's speaking. And so it actually turned out really, really easy. The stuff that wasn't me, I did in a really close third person for a few pages, and then I just shifted it to the I, and it's like you don't notice it, you know. And so at the end, it just becomes like totally wiggy and visionary. It was sort of like, so I don't know. I really do have a hard time staying in. It's sort of like, you know, some people are like formalists, and they say, I'm going to do this book in this many sections, and I'm going to use the word rose in each section, and so I'm like, you know, they do all this stuff, but I'm more like, I look at the material and say, what can I do to kind of get my vision of it across and use whatever. And so there's a lot of going back and forth between autobiography type stuff and fiction, and I don't really see a big difference. You know, when you're writing like nonfiction or autobiographical writing, you're creating a character, and you know, all those god awful creative nonfiction seminars and stuff. You know, one of the main topics has come up, like how it's kind of accepted that everybody invents, but when does invention become lying? And that line is like something that's very much discussed, right? And you know, so does that answer your question?
I still feel it does, and I'm really grateful. And I still feel a little curious about what it is in the content that pushes you into fiction specifically.
Okay, what is it in the content that does what?
Well, what is the feeling? Like you said, there's no way that an autobiographical essay will give someone the feeling of being in a cult. I'm wondering what.
Well, it's just sort of like kind of, I guess when it was an autobiography, I was talking about a lot of actions, and then I would talk about my feelings, but we weren't inside the feelings. So I was trying to somehow approximate a certain consciousness. And that's like kind of where this kind of highly poetic fiction came in, so that I would do that. You know, and poetry is, I think most of the poets I know, not like kind of straightforward lyric poets. They're doing like an experimental poetry, but you know, you're creating an experience that the reader enters into. It's not about reading it and just saying this meant this necessarily. You know. Would you agree? Yes. Okay.
Other questions? Can we talk about horror films and pornography?
Sure. You asked Tuesday night.
I know I did, but I have more thought.
Okay, then I'd like to hear this.
Well, one of my thoughts is that, so both horror and pornography are forms that are kind of, their direction, their intention is towards our bodies, right? They're to make us feel things in our bodies rather than our heads. And both of them fail a lot, right? Like horror can be very funny, pornography can be funny, and I think that you do something with that kind of hinge, right? When it works and when it doesn't work. Because there's a lot of like you love the bad horror, especially, I'm talking about Mina in particular,
Yeah.
so it's not sections you've heard, but I feel like it structures the book.
Yeah. But there is sort of this feeling that even in the worst crappy horror film, that there's something it exists because it touches some part of us that wants to be touched. I was thinking about this actually after you talked. I read a Quake's research bureau on Tuesday, and he asked us a similar question. But I think it's just not pornography and horror, like romance novels. You know, that your body's just totally there, you know? And so I just seems like anything that you read that creates a charge is somehow bringing the body into the writing. Maybe not in ways you can totally control, but don't you think?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, affect, we call it affect now, right?
Yeah, we call it, I don't, but yeah.
Right.
Affect theory, what the fuck is that? This is a lie, I have read affect theory. But anyway.
I would say that pornography and horror are separate categories somehow, right? And I know they're.
Well, I mean, they're really degraded by this society.
Right.
Well, I mean, except for certain enlightened pockets of society, they're not. But yeah.
So it's kind of the low, right?
Yeah.
Low in terms of that it aims low, and it's not.
That's good. That's good.
Mm.
I like
So it's,
that.
any more questions?
Yeah.
A silly question. We were talking earlier about the mix of kind of what you're watching with what you're, looking at. And so what are you watching? What are you
Watching right now. I'm not watching anything particularly interesting right now. So I don't think any of it will end up in the writing. Well, I have found that if I watch TV on my iPad, the kitchen gets cleaned up much more regularly. So, but you kind of need a certain level. You can't have subtitles. You can't be too involved. So I've been watching The Closer on my iPad with my AirPods. Some movies here and there. But a friend of mine just wrote this incredible essay on the X-Files, and it's behind a paywall, but she sent me a PDF. And I had never watched the X-Files, so I've been sort of very confused why the X-Files was successful. I just figure I haven't gotten that thing where you just don't care anymore. Or maybe it changes, but it's really interesting about how wordy the dialogue is and how awkward and stagey the acting is, and it's I don't know. I just find it really confusing. But I think that it kind of really adds to this. No matter how naturalistic it is, it doesn't feel. It feels stylized. And that's kind of odd for a television show, right? Does it change? Does it get more like you just watching a regular show, or it stays that way?
It's weird.
Yeah. Okay. So, but it's interesting watching the old shows, in terms of the sort of dialogue around sex that goes on now, how much I have internalized them. On The Closer, 10 years ago, this really kind of one of the people's sisters is there in the, with all the detectives. And she's like a real babe, and they're all drooling over her. And it's a Christmas episode, so they have a drunk Santa. And the drunk Santa keeps making excuses and brushing her breasts. And they're acting and it is written as if this were a funny, jokey thing. And it's just so funny that, it would be impossible. I think 10 years ago I could see it that way, maybe. But now I'm just the way I keep being appalled by the old shows, just because I have kind of incorporated the discussions that are going on now, So.
Smile.
Okay, it's okay.
Thank you, everybody. Dodie has books for sale to sign, and we're gonna have a reception down the stairs, right,
Oh,
Rosa?
there's a reception?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
It's down those stairs. Go out that door, down those stairs.
What's that? Okay, so these are books yours.
These are in the box. Where's Rosa, where should we sell the books? Here or down there?